and nation-to-nation relationships ensued. Their relationships were formalized through treaties, which in some cases included commercial arrangements and military alliances. Yeah, the Europeans have been milling about and shaking hands, and I think they're probably going to start handing out index cards pretty soon. They won't be handing cards to all of you, just perhaps about half of you. Some of these index cards will just be a plain card. Some of them will have colored X's on. Some will have a green X, some a black X, some a red X, and I believe some a blue X. Those of you who receive cards, most of you can just stay where you are or continue milling about, but there are a few that we have some special instructions for now already. If you're given a card with a blue X on it, I would ask you to kind of shuffle your way over to that side of the blankets. You don't have to be in any particular place, but just sort of on that side. If you have a green X, you'll notice that there's a purple blanket, dark and light purple. Perhaps one of those colors is lilac, I don't know. I call them all purple. Please, if you have a card with a green X, please go stand on the purple blanket. Purple X? I'll get to that. The black X, people who have a card with a black X, sort of make your way to this side of the blanket, to the part of the room that's on my right, sort of in this area here.
Do the rest of us move to accommodate?
Yeah, make room for someone if they come by. Yeah, yeah. And okay, I've given instructions to blue, green, and black. And people with a red X, if you could sort of move into the area, there's a wooden table near the entry door that you came through. If you could come and, yeah, all stay on the blankets, please. Just move into that area. There's a blue blanket and a brown striped blanket. If you have a red agreements between European crowns and Aboriginal nations that formally recognized each nation's sovereignty and independence. The treaties affirmed that Aboriginal peoples were the original inhabitants, that their territories belonged to them, and that they were self-governing. The European crowns understood that they had no right to impose their laws or ways on the Aboriginal peoples.
The Royal Proclamation of 1763 hereby confirms that Aboriginal nations have title to their lands, and that consensual treaty making with the Crown is the only way that land can be ceded from Aboriginal peoples.
Later on, the Canadian federal government replaced the Crown as the treaty-making body, and the Royal Proclamation of 1763 was entrenched in Canada's Constitution Act in 1982. To Aboriginal peoples, treaties were sacred agreements that were marked with spiritual ceremonies. They were definitely not statements of submission or surrender. They were not real estate deals. Instead, they were statements of peace, friendship, sharing, and alliance that were based on instructions of traditional Aboriginal spirituality around sharing, respect, and honesty. Treaties were means of sharing land and resources and ensuring peaceful coexistence among diverse people. At this point, I'll just remind you, please stay on the blankets, even if the blankets start to get a little smaller. Shuffle yourself around. Things might start to happen that you weren't expecting. But the Europeans had altogether different views of land and of treaties. For them, land, please stay on the blanket. Yeah. Please stay on the blankets, yeah. Just straightening some people out here that weren't listening very well. The Europeans had altogether different views of land and treaties. For them, land was a commodity that could be bought and sold, and treaties were a means of getting Aboriginal peoples to surrender or extinguish their title to land. You'll notice that for some of you it's getting a little more crowded as these Europeans move about. You'll notice also that they're wearing their shoes. Over time, the relationship between Aboriginal peoples and Europeans continued to deteriorate. With the end of the War of 1812, Europeans no longer needed Aboriginal peoples as military allies. As the fur trade dried up in many parts of Canada, and as colonists turned more and more to agriculture, they no longer needed them as trading partners either. I think they're still moving around folding blankets up, squeezing you a little bit tighter. Soon the Europeans began to outnumber the Aboriginal people. One reason for this was diseases that the Europeans had brought with them. Diseases such as smallpox, measles, and tuberculosis, for which the original Aboriginal peoples had no immunity. Now I think that one of the Europeans is going to be bringing a blanket and handing it to somebody who has a blank index card. Please accept this blanket. This blanket represents your exposure to tuberculosis, measles, and smallpox. Some experts believe that fully half of the Aboriginal population alive at the time died from these diseases. Many communities were decimated and lost as much as 90% of their members. Okay, could all of you who have a blank index card please step off the blankets, move to the sides of the room, sit down or remain standing, but please get off. Also meant an ever-increasing demand for land for settlement. Fueled by new ideas from Europe about the inferiority of non-white races, colonists began to view First Peoples no longer as allies, but as obstacles to expansion and settlement, as a problem to be solved. And the Europeans continue to squeeze in on your territory. The Europeans changed their policies and practices to take land from the Aboriginal people. Some land was taken by killing people. The Beothuk from what is now Newfoundland were among those. Decimated by exposure to diseases through contact with European people, and then victimized by armed conflict, they became extinct. If you have a blue index card with a blue X on it, you represent the Beothuk people. Please step off your blankets and move to the edge of the room, as you're no longer a part of Turtle Island. On the prairies and along the west coast, another method was used to decimate Aboriginal populations. In these regions, thousands lost their lives to smallpox, contracted through the deliberate distribution of blankets infested with the smallpox virus. Those of you who have a red X on your index card, you represent the Aboriginal people who came into contact with the smallpox-infested blankets and lost your lives. Please step off the blankets and move to the edge of the room. A lot more land, since it was taken without any right or justification, was stolen outright by the government, which used laws that it had written to enable it to do just that. A band of Cree people under the leadership of Chief Little Chip Wyan had selected reserve land near Laird, Saskatchewan, right near where Gord lives, when they signed Treaty No. 6 in 1876. In 1897, without consultation or compensation, the government assigned this land to be part of a larger area reserved for Mennonite settlers. Those of you who have a green X on your index card, you should be on that purple blanket there, you represent the Little Chippewayan people. Your land has been handed over to settlers now. Could you please move off of your land and find a space on some of the other blankets? You'll have to live with other people now. Yet others were removed from their traditional territories and relocated to unfamiliar locations without consultation. The plight of the Innu people of Davis Inlet and now Natuashish, which regularly made news headlines during the last 20 years or so, is a stark